Thank you so much for being here for this screening of Ted K. What a phenomenal movie. I would love to introduce director Tony Stone. We have a producer, Flanders, and please welcome Sharlto Copley. Wow, when I saw that this was a movie about Ted Kaczynski, I was expecting something conventional, and conventional is absolutely not what this movie is. And that is absolutely to his credit. It is a riveting, gripping, powerful film, and I just would love to, right? I mean, it's amazing, it's really amazing. Also, your performance is absolutely phenomenal. So my first question is, of course, it's the obvious one. How did this come about? And I'm going to start with you, Tony.
How did it come about?
Loaded question.
Yeah, loaded word. Yeah, it was an idea I had for a while, about 10 years ago, and then the story kind of got more and more interesting the further we got from his arrest, and the more his ideas actually had there was sort of the prophetic part of his ideas that I think 20 years ago people thought were kind of absurd and would never come true. As we're dealing with environmental degradation and technological addiction and all these sorts of things, the themes became stronger. But it was a story I wanted to tell because it was something that happened in 1996, and it was a very simplistic. How it was reported was very straightforward and simplistic. And like any of these stories, the more you dig, the more interesting it gets. So wanted to also look at it from the aspect of alternative history and look at other sort of American terrorists, from people like John Brown to even how Black Panthers and Fred Hampton. So it was kind of in the context of looking at domestic terrorism that I thought the story would be interesting to tell. And then just really wanted to tell an immersive, subjective version of Kaczynski, and kind of get away from the cliche narratives of law enforcement tropes and all this stuff, and see what it was like to really be with a villain and see if you could identify and find the humanity in with somebody that was technically evil. Good and evil is something that I don't really think is actually exists. It's far more complicated than that. So anyway, that's sort of where the story or my interest began, and then from there we kind of just managed to make a movie out of it.
So Matt, tell me about the first conversations that you had with Tony, not just about the subject matter of the film, but about the way the movie was going to be made, the style, the impressionistic, avant-garde version that we saw.
So I just looked back on my emails to see when the first email I got from Tony's and his and another executive producer named Melissa Optimar, who happens to also be Tony's wife. And they sent me an email when I was working at Plan B, Brad Pitt's company, in 2013. So that's the first, it was August of 2013, and I'm originally from Montana. So reading that script, I was really fascinated about the Montana aspect of it, of course, because all the other stories I'd seen about him had to do with the manhunt and the law enforcement, and I was very interested in what was he doing in this little teeny town that I grew up about 35 miles from. What was he doing that entire time there? And so I ended up leaving the company to move back to New York, and we kept talking, and we just decided that we were gonna go for it. And we found a casting director we really liked named Jennifer Benedetti, who does all sorts of stuff, the Safdie Brothers stuff, but she also does the new HBO series, what's it called, with Zendaya, Euphoria. She does a lot of street casting, and she kind of put a call out and started talking to agents, and then Sharlto came on board, and we saw his, he did something very interesting. He did not, we sent pages out, but he didn't do that. He basically found an interview that Ted Kaczynski did, and very few interviews.
There's one.
There's one. And he found that and basically just did an exact, the voice, everything. And just, we both just freaked
It was just
out.
so obvious. It was,
Yeah,
this
we
is the
just
person.
freaked out.
And when you make these, there's this horrible waiting game where you have to pass around a script forever and wait, and then we just decided to hand it out to everybody, and we're so glad we had these delays that it aligned so that Sharlto could find it. And luckily, there was another script floating around that was about the another Maurer story that Viggo Mortensen was interested with.
Yeah, I used the same tape.
Oh,
I
yeah?
actually sent it to both.
Oh, good.
at the
So you
same
can actually.
time.
I was wondering if we could say
The
this.
director was like, "You have to play dead," and I was like, "Oh, this is a tough one."
I did it for this
Being
small
the villain in
film.
this one, or kind of the hero in that one, it was kind of weird. They never made that.
But yeah, and I think one of our conversations in the beginning, Sharlto, was like, maybe he could do both. He could do
Yeah, I
the Unabomber
actually- yeah.
in this Hollywood cop one, and then will be the Ted Kaczynski Chronicles. That's all Sharlto that we do.
Art house
That's
one.
really
Yeah.
good. But luckily, that other one fell apart. So here we are.
Well, so for first, Sharlto, like, where did you even find the one interview that Ted did?
YouTube, and he just.
Oh, of course you do.
Hey
You
guys,
didn't
no.
see him. He it's a still. It was in jail, and so you just hear his voice, and it was just completely different from any version of him because I started researching, and any of the versions that we done, I was like, this is not the guy that I imagined. Like, I'm gonna kill people, but it was not that. It was this sort of energetic guy who was passionate, talking about. Basically, once he had a microphone, he was, once people were listening, he was really eloquent and sort of nerdily funny and fascinating to listen to. And I just that was the biggest way into the character for me, was just listening to how he sounded and his energy and kind of going, I feel like I sort of know this guy, weirdly.
Well, see, now that's the thing. Like, you felt like you knew this guy. And watching this movie, I felt like I knew this guy. And that is an incredible accomplishment for a film to, especially the way this movie is made, to get into somebody's head like that. But you really had the motherlode of research materials because you had his actual words to go on, and that's in the script. I mean, how did that, obviously it did help you, but how did that help you get in his head?
Yeah, we had done some research about 10 years ago, and then 3-4 years ago, we got access to all his archives.
Wow.
And he's so honest about how he feels, and he wrote 4 different autobiographies, and he was writing these entries thinking no one else would ever read them, so they were obviously extra honest. But there's so much material. I mean, up to the end, we did film the movie, over 4 different shoots over an entire year, so we could have the seasons, we could have the realism of the place. And up to the end, we were trying to get more of these scenes and more of these moments. They were just so fascinating. But that does tie into that. It wasn't just the research of his words; it was the research of the place. Filming on the exact location. Became archaeological at a point. We would find artifacts all the time, every day. We would incorporate them into the film. Obviously, you see some of those scenes. The scene with the water pipe. We knew that Ted irrigated his garden with a pipe. That pipe was still there from 25 years later, and we filmed Sharlto trying to figure out how to irrigate his actual garden with his barbed wire, and he was pretty satisfied and excited once he figured it out. But then too, being in the actual root cellars, filming some scenes next to these random, buckets and jugs of chemicals that the FBI had left behind, that who knows what they were, but that was very eerie. So it would affect the actor, it would affect the crew, we would learn things about the story, and then also being there, the people in the town opened up to us and told us stories. So there's plenty of these scenes that were never in the original script that we were told, and we actually can also use those people in the film too.
That was the advantage of you being on, right, hey, Matt?
I think that was very helpful to have somebody
Yeah.
from Montana there, because we did have, at first there was some hesitancy, and we actually had a premiere. It was very important for us to kind of thank the people of Lincoln and of Montana for allowing their lives for months, and to tell us their true feelings and secrets and stories about him. And I think it was helpful that I was able to say, like at the library, for example, the librarian was very hesitant to let us in because she was friendly with him and she thought that we were going to, you know, tear him apart and not show that he was actually kind to her son and tutored him and all this stuff. And but she was really hesitant. I was like, oh, well, my mom's Judy Flanders. She owns the Montana Book Company in Helena. And she's like, oh, wow. Oh, I buy books from her. Oh, you know what? Okay, I guess, yeah, I'll talk to you about it. And, you know, and it was just those little things. And the people who owned the actual property, the woman who, her husband was in the military. He really didn't want to do it because they were going to build they were going to bulldoze the land and put a hunting cabin there, which they have done, and I have photos of it on my phone, and it is tacky. I gotta show it to you. It's so bad. But anyway,
That looks really nice. I thought, okay.
oh, it's bad.
It's a lot.
It has like rainbow chairs around. It's really anyway. The woman had gone to high school with my sister, and so it helped to convince her. It helped convince her, like, oh, okay, we know these people, and so let's do it. But it wasn't just, can we shoot on your property? It was, can we basically do it for almost free for an entire year?
For an entire year. I mean, that's what was pretty wild. And that was the Montana spirit. And, you know, people eventually really opened up to us. And it was, you know, we made lifelong friends there. And Lincoln's a really interesting place. And, you know, yeah, it was a life experience. It was very cool.
Interesting is a word and a half for it, for sure.
I mean, it's a place that has 600 people and 5 bars, so it's very lively.
Sharlto, please tell us about your prep, your research, your just immersive commitment to playing Ted Kaczynski.
Well, like I say, I mean, it was really, I guess, the manifesto was the start, reading that. I actually didn't want to do it when they first sent it to me. They were like, you know, because I grew up in South Africa. I remember something on the news about the Unabomber, but I just thought he was one of these guys, you know, terrorist who like serial killer or blew up a building or something. And they said Unabomber. And I was like, I don't really like doing villains, you know. And so, but then I started researching him, read the manifesto, and I was like, whoa, okay, this is totally, sort of doesn't add up. Like what you read in the manifesto and then what you read about him from that time. It's just like, there was this crazy guy who was blowing up people and we put him away and everyone's fine.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's, okay, it's interesting, you know, but it seems like you put him away really quickly, you know. And it was like he never spoke and he never came out and said anything, you know. And so that was really intriguing in terms of his arguments. I had started to feel and notice, because I love gadgets and I love tech, but I'd really started to see how like my phone was just dominating my life. And like, I guess everybody, you know, you start to feel like, wow, this is really, what was it like before there were phones? You know, it's like, I feel like I was happier before there were phones. I think I was. It's like, no, you can't be, because you couldn't have reached everybody all the time. It's like, I couldn't have been happier, but something in me is like, I feel like, I still think I was though. And so the subject matter was interesting, and I could relate in that sense to, I guess, the arguments he was making. And then, yeah, like I say, the voice was kind of key for some reason, and his kind of energetic presence coming through the mic. And it was really just that, and research, and then speaking to people. We got to speak to people in the town. There was literally only one person in the whole of Lincoln that was his friend, which was the librarian. And I said to her, which was interesting, I said, once she was trusting us, and you know, we sort of got in there through Matt, and I said to her, what do you remember about Ted? What do you miss about him? And she said, I miss laughing with him. And I was like, okay, wow, that's again something. Everybody else, you know, in the town had sort of encountered him, had negative stuff generally, and he was really quiet, and he never spoke, and he stank, and the librarian was like, you know, he was just a very funny guy. Like, he would just make sort of witty, dry, sarcastic, super intelligent, of course, because his IQ is like 167, and she would just laugh with him.
And I will say that her son, she's not doing well, but her son came to the premiere in Montana. His name's Danny, and introduced himself to us, and he said, I've watched every single thing that's ever been done about the Unabomber, because I actually liked him. He was kind to me, he tutored me, he meant something to me. So I've watched it all, and they've all got it wrong except you.
Wow. Well, that's high
And
praise.
it felt really good to hear that, that, you know, he was like, yeah, I know that this guy was horrible and did horrible, horrible, horrible things, but there was a side to him that there was a kindness, and I didn't fit in, and he made me feel good, and he, you know, he helped me, and that's what Sherry said as well, the librarian.
I have to say, watching the film, I watched it before and then I came in and watched it again tonight. And I just was kind of floored by just how much I thought I knew about the Unabomber, which was what you were describing, that he, you know, this guy did a couple things, they put him away and that was that. And that's clearly, Ted Kaczynski was a very complex person and he had a side that made, you know, that I empathized with him watching this movie. So my question, Tony, for you, for starters, is what were the challenges to get that right, like Matt said?
To get the right balance, we definitely approached it like it was a documentary, you know, where you're really just trying to be honest to the person, to the character, whoever you're documenting. So, you know, it was a lot about curating, obviously, his writings, and, you know, and just creating the spectrum. I think that was a big thing of, you know, who this guy was. You know, I think by actually being in the place, hearing what people had to say, you know, and even down to the costumes, you know, we felt very confident of the choices we made. There weren't things we were searching for. So when you see him, for instance, come onto the sawmill and he's wearing a trench coat that's open, you know, that's what he wore because that's how it was described to from the little neighbor. So, you know, all these different little ticks of him, you know, we could lean on, you know, and they could say more than they usually would in a movie. And they were just very crucial to get all these details, you know. So we just kind of gleaned as much as possible. But, you know, we started off with the long cut, and there's a balance of, you know, trying to have empathy, but also show the heinous things he did, you know. But obviously, it's about getting to the, you know, there's a human behind this, you know, and that was the approach from the beginning. And, you know, as technology has made us more polarized and more black and white our thinking, you know, this is kind of just sort of looking under the hood of what somebody is like, and, you know, on their own with mental illness, and using that subjectivity to kind of be extremely, you know, honest, you know, and create a sort of, you know, something that's more true by actually being with this person, you know, and then so. You know, it was a whole process to kind of get that balance right, but kind of like you were saying, feeling like that you knew the Unabomber and this was him. Like, you know, I feel like doing 10 years of research that this is as close as you can get, you know, from place to the performance to everything else, you know. But it's a delicate tightrope for sure, you know. And there's all sort of pitfalls we could have found, but I think it really does, you know, sum up who this person really was.
Yeah, Charles, I just want to say what you were saying about our addiction to phones. Like a couple weeks ago, I was in a rush and I, you know, left my home without my phone, and I just didn't realize until I was too far to go back and get it, and I felt like lost without my phone. Oh my God, like it was, and I didn't like that I felt that way, you know. Yeah. But anyway, regardless of that, the depth of your performance is such that I have to ask that. How did that affect you? How did you go to that place?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the other thing, like I sort of simplified earlier when you said, you know, how you get into the guy's head, just listening to the voice, it was a lot more than that. Ultimately, just, you know, thinking back, he had an enormous amount of writing, and it was brutally honest and incredibly self-aware. You're talking about a guy who's got, you know, 167 IQ, and then people are deciding whether or not he's crazy or not, you know what I mean? And I'm kind of like, well, if your IQ's like 105, can you really tell a 167 guy that he, you know what I mean? Like, are you sure? Are you positive? You know what I mean? How do you know that? Like, we're all riding on the shoulders of these, like, 167 IQ giants, frankly, if we're being honest. You know, there's a couple of little guys and girls and, you know, around the world that you know, invent everything else and work out everything, and we just cruise along and, you know, press the buttons. And he was definitely one of those, you know, Ted had that type of mind, and so when you go into it, you know, he would be incredibly honest about his his feeling. I mean, and you could, you know, for the humanity of him, it was quite easy because he was incredibly lonely. He yearned for a woman in his life, and it was the strangest thing that he just couldn't get a partner. Like you say in the movie, you know, he tongue rubbed twice, and that's the expression that he actually used. And but there's heartbreaking stuff, and we shot so much of it. And you know, just deciding for Tony to decide what was going in or out, it's a very difficult decision. But like he went, there were stories like and we shot them. You know, he went and to one of his female friends, actually took a dossier on himself, and he basically went like, what am I doing wrong? How do I get a partner? Like, I'm this and I'm this and I'm that, and like, what am I doing wrong? Or, you know, he would write in his diaries, like, he would masturbate and he would think of himself as a woman because he was so starved for female affection and energy. And on the other hand, he would be very sort of, you know, very stereotypically, like you see in the film, very kind of derogatory towards women, as in like, women have a place. You know, not derogatory in the full sense, but old-fashioned, you know, very much like, this is what a man does, this is what a woman does. So it was a fascinating.
And I actually think, we all have sort of our different takes on what the message is here, or what the kind of the takeaway is. And for me, it's a story of someone who's unable to connect. I mean, his whole downfall is due to the fact that he wasn't able to truly connect with his brother and his brother's wife. I mean, had he, you know, they tried to warn him. They tried to say, like, this has got to stop, and he just didn't want to have anything to do with them. And they're the ones who turned him in, you know, and for his own good. But in the same way, and what's really amazing is that his brother basically, before he turned him in, made a deal, said he wouldn't get the death penalty. So, you know, there's some really deep stuff there about family, about human connection. And you know, it's interesting, he's fighting against technology, you know, because it's going to keep us from connecting, it's going to destroy humanity, and yet he himself can't connect either. So there's a lot going on there.
Tony, you say you filmed in Montana over the course of a year. How much footage did you shoot?
There's a lot. But, you know, I mean, what's good these days, because you're shooting digital, it's all just terabytes. And then, so I kind of like that you actually don't know what minutes are, you know, because I mean, I also like, you know, Ms. Herzog's, you know, his line, which is, you know, you don't want to be garbage collectors, you know, as filmmakers. So I don't think we're garbage collectors by any means. So there really is, you know, a 4-hour cut that maybe in 20 years we'll get together and release, you know. But it's all interesting, you know. But I would say it's probably 100 terabytes. So you can do the math and figure out what we're shooting. But we shot between 4 and 8K, and so you know, then once you have 100 terabytes, you got to have 300 terabytes of storage. So it's, you know, tons of drive. So there was a lot of drives, I'd say.
Yeah, there was a lot of driving on that bicycle too that we didn't use. Hey, Tony.
Hey, we're gonna use
Aussie cocksucker.
We're gonna.
Yeah.
I think we did.
There's a music video that
It was
we're
a
gonna
classic
cut to,
joke.
you know.
We honestly did like 6 days of just bicycle.
He would make me ride, I shit you not, like 15 minutes, like drive all the way into town, and then they're driving around. I'm like, dude, you're never gonna use this. Like, I'm tired. Like, he's like, yeah, no, maybe we use. I'm like, come on, man.
We had to do every
Like
different
4
outfits
shots of the
too,
bike.
because you didn't know when you needed it for the outfit, you know. So,
So
you
you
know,
have to
you're
do
glad we did, because we might have missed the one moment we needed the bike.
This man also cut down that, I mean, that was a fake telephone pole or power line. He cut that down himself. He is the one who cut through that wall to get inside the house. I mean, he did all of this stuff.
He's an expert.
This man committed to everything. He skinned that rabbit. He did everything. And he, was running after those motorcycles. I mean, everything. Running up the hills with the gun, shooting at that thing.
He's a pro.
Don't clap. It's embarrassing. When you actually in Montana and you've lived in the city, it's embarrassing. Like as a man, like when you realize what you can actually do. It's like I can Uber. Some guy's like, have you ever cut down a tree? I'm like, no, I haven't actually. As it happens, I don't know how to cut down a tree or like skin a deer, or because we also did deer and we did like rabbits, and yeah, God help us all. Don't do that civil war thing between like the country people and the city people, because it's not like it was back in the day where everyone was kind of tough. Like the city guys are dead. It's like and they were, but they were just really helpful people too out there. Hey? They were just, everybody was helping us
Everybody was generous, even
Yeah.
down to that scene of chopping the telephone pole.
Yeah.
They were excited we were going
Teaching
to
them.
tell that story.
Yeah.
And the old line crew came in a day, it was pouring rain after work, and dropped those poles in for us for free, you know, just because they were like, yo, you're going to tell the thing that nobody knows, you know? And then we chopped it down and made a whole mess and had to get rid of them. But yeah, people were just so open and kind, and I think that's where, you know, all these, you know, there's a lot of Ted Kaczynski movies that were, you know, let's say shot in Georgia. They never came to Lincoln. So Lincoln opened up to us because we were telling the Lincoln version, you know, their actual, you know, their tale, and it was, you know, a very cool experience. I mean, you know, people coming from the coast, people coming from South Africa to, you know, come to the backyard to shoot the movie. Of course, they'd be skeptical, but I think they saw, you know, that we were trying to, you know, do something different.
When did you finally say that's a wrap? Do you remember the last scene you shot?
I mean, probably like a few months ago, but you know, I mean, I try to do everything as much as possible, you know, when I can, and it can, sometimes it's just me, so, you know, pick up shots, you know, I edit the film, I do try to, there's always trying to squeeze a little bit more blood out of that rock, and, you know, so, yeah, there was a few changes that still happened after, you know, just before, you know, it went to the lab, or while I was at the lab and sending a few shots. So, you know, being independent, that allows you to do these things, you know, and so.
I mean, our crew was in Montana was around, I mean, 20, maybe 25 to 35, usually around 25. That's it. So even less than that on.
Yeah, I think trying to stay small so you get more days, and I think that's kind of lost in the process, you know, or just how films are made these days, and it's all about actors' schedules and things like that. And that's what's so amazing about Sharlto, is that he was willing to come back 4 times to do this, and it's just his, you know, a director's dream, and it was also the only way we could make it. And I don't mean to, you know, overly flatter you here, but like, that is incredible. And you know, I think any agent hears that and they're terrified, but Sharlto, you know, did it, and you know, it shows, and it allowed us to also revisit things and work out things. And you know, films should have time to be done right. You know, all our favorite filmmakers had that time, and it's something kind of lost in this new system of filmmaking that we need to get rid of.
So you went back to the set 4 times.
Yeah.
So you had to get back into his skin
Yes.
4 times.
Yes.
Oh, man, that sounds brutal.
Well, you know what? The funny thing, like somebody asked me the other day in an interview or something, they said, you know, was it draining on you and tough and everything, and you know, you can see in the environment, and I was like, it was actually super relaxing because I'm in the wild. I had no trailer. Most of the time, between takes, I had no trailer.
Tent.
And there was a tent on one of the shoots. One of the times that I came, there was a tent. I think the last time. But really, what I would do is I would just, between takes, I go sit and I just look at a stream. You know, and there was no big crew and big setup or whatever. I would literally just sit there in the wild looking at a flower for 20 minutes and literally zen out. You know, like he says in the film, you know, and so I'd be super calm and like whatever, and they'd be like, Dad, and I'm like, okay, you know, and then go back into, or depending on obviously what the scene was. And I spent so much time, you know, just there, just in the forest, and then between moving. So once I remember being back in South Africa, and I was riding my bike in a game reserve, and I wasn't really thinking about the movie or anything. I was just enjoying like a mountain bike ride, you know, in this reserve. And all of a sudden I saw this truck coming, and I got this feeling, and that's how I knew it affected me. I was like, this fucking alien thing, like coming and destroying, you know, the environment. And it was, I saw the truck as he speaks about it, and you know, when you live like that and he talks about this obviously, when you live in a situation where every living thing has a fair shot at everything else, and then suddenly a truck comes, or one of those machines with the, you know, chains, I don't remember what they're called.
Skidder.
It's the skidder, that's right. It's like an alien creature, or being. It would be for us like an alien comes and just has power that is just beyond anything we can fathom completely. Like your nuclear thing goes like ping, and they just blow that out. And it's like, and so so it stayed with me in that way. I didn't stay in the, you know, tormented or anything. But the tech stuff and just looking at my computer and, you know, looking at nature. So yeah, just coming back in each time was the nature was super helpful.
Yeah, the last question, Tony, for you is, and you talked about like takeaway, and I feel like a movie like this, you should take away what you are going to take away, because it is not a conventional film. But did you have a goal when you set out to do this, and how did that goal change over the 10 years?
I don't know if I had a goal. I mean, I did want to tell a movie. I mean, part of the story I was interested is in, as a vehicle to talk about environmentalism and or the environment and technology. And Ted Kaczynski was that vehicle. But I think as we're really facing, some pretty serious environmental collapse in the next decade, and this climate cliff we're going over, we do need to talk about it, and Ted Kaczynski brings that up, So, in the back behind the story, those are the things that really concern me, and it's really dire, and we need to address it. But wanted to separate that to that. This is a tale. You see Ted's worlds of reacting to it, and his solutions. They're not the right ones, but maybe we could find some right action, to actually kind of deal with this extremely quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, so Ted K is in theaters. It is also on demand. Please go on social media, which is the best way to spread a word about a movie these days. Please spread the word about Ted K. Thank you so much for being here, gentlemen.
Thank you.